Yeah, it was
That's very much
a lot of fun. It was a good shoot.
That's awesome.
All right, good morning. Guess it's still morning for a little bit longer. I'll call this meeting of the Social Service Grants Committee together, October 22nd. And I'd like to start with some brief introductions. My name's Neil Dobler, represent District 7. I believe Councilman Kell is on.
Yes. Councilman Brett Kell, representing 5th District.
Thank you. We expect Councilwoman Ortiz here momentarily, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Would like to ask some of the other folks at this council meeting to introduce themselves, starting with Rhiannon, if you would just go down the row.
Absolutely. Rhiannon Friedman, Planning and Development Director.
Jessica Lenhair, United Way of Caw Valley.
Brett Martin, United Way of Caw Valley.
Great. We appreciate you being here. We'll start with item number 2, approval of the July 9th minutes. And I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
And I'll second that. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that passes. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 3, which is really the focus of this committee meeting, and start in with our 2023 year-end review. Might point out before we get here, this whole process almost covers 3 years, I guess. We're talking about 2023 in terms of how these agencies performed with the money that the grants that were appropriated a couple years ago. This is 2024. We're talking about decisions that get made in 2025, but the money actually doesn't get spent till 2026. Good morning, Councilwoman. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself when you sit down, please?
Thank you. Sorry I'm running late. I'm late, Councilwoman Sylvia Ortiz.
Late but here. That's what counts. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Brett to talk about the year-end review.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to share today. What you have in front of you is a report from United Way of Caw Valley staff that includes data that was collected through the EC Impact Grant Portal as part of reports from City of Topeka grantees for the 2023 year. What you see to the far left is the agency. Just to the right of that, you see their program name. And then in the middle, taking up the majority of the page, you see the performance measure as selected by the agency themselves. So agencies are able to choose their own performance measures, and then they project a certain number, and they then have the number that they actually served or that were successful in that piece. And then so you see that under projected. You see that next piece under the number who were served or the number who were successful or met that metric. And then you see the percent achieved, which would be the outcome. So these are listed in alphabetical order, beginning with Boys and Girls Club and ending with Topeka LULAC for those pieces. A few things to note here. In the current structure of this arrangement with United Way of Caw Valley, we don't have a lot of influence related to the performance measures. We are simply, as the vendor, required to accept those performance measures, and then the organizations choose their projections. For a future vendor, recognizing that this opportunity to be the vendor is now out for RFP. So this is our last time with this under the current contract and under the current RFP that is in play. We have an opportunity for the next vendor, whoever that is, to have something included in the contract that allows some consultation between the vendor and the program and agency related to the performance measure and the quality of that performance measure, and then related to projections. So for example, you've got some of these organizations that have achieved well over 100%. That, from our vantage point, suggests that those projection numbers were potentially too low. And through some coaching and some conversation, we feel like we would be able to work with some of these partners a little better. That's not the case under the current scope of work that we have, but for a future vendor, that would certainly be an opportunity. That said, many of these outcomes, many of these performance measures could, under a critical eye, be described not as outcomes, which are performance measures that demonstrate some measure of change in the client or in the individual served, but rather more as an output, the quantitative number of folks who were served. And so again, for a future vendor, there may be some opportunity for some back and forth between the vendor and the grantees to be able to increase the quality of the outcomes so that it accurately reflects the good work of the agency, while at the same time working on some of those projection numbers to maybe help bring some of those a little more into line.
Very good. Rhiannon, any thoughts on that?
No, I would just, I would second Brett's comments on that and also share what he alluded to earlier about our RFP for our Social Service Grants Administrator Program opening up on October 1st. So it's currently open through the 30th, so accepting applicants for that currently.
Great. Yeah, I noticed that, I mean, as you mentioned, almost all of the entities achieved over 100%. Some of them were way over 100%. I assume the ones that, and there was maybe two that were well below their goals, I assume that was taken into account this last go around as we looked at allocating funds for the current year for 2025.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. So those outcomes were pulled as part of the scoring for current applicants or current grantees for this year. But then they are, I guess they would have been pulled for the most recent applicants. Sorry,
Right.
would have been pulled for the most recent.
2025.
Correct, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions from the committee? Or Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. So is our goal to get them to maybe to serve more or get them to do, I guess what's our goal, Brett? Is it to, I understand to keep track of them, but is it to get them to serve more, to get them, because we can come in every year and give them money and, okay, we're at 100% and we're at 100%.
Right.
But I think if we don't meet a higher threshold, then they're not going to strive for that. So I guess that's one of my questions. The other question is, and I don't care how you answer it, the other question is, do we ever have any of these grantees that don't use up their money and have money at the end of the year? Or do we roll that money over, or what happens?
So the dollars aren't rolled over. Juliet, is that something you can speak to? My understanding is that we don't have any partners who don't spend all of their dollars.
That is correct.
Yeah,
That is
okay.
correct.
Okay.
They're all zeroed out by the end of the grant, so.
Okay.
And I figured that, but what would we do if that were to happen?
Yeah, that would
If the-
fall under the purview of this committee and under the city because those dollars are budgeted annually. In particular, the dollars that come from HUD through the CDB, through the Community Development Block Grant, there are heavy restrictions on those dollars. So,
I would just chime in. I think something that we could do if that situation were to arise is me and Carrie could come back and present a proposal of what those funds could be used for underneath the HUD guidelines, and that could be something that the committee talks
Okay.
about, how to use those going forward.
I just didn't know, I know that they strive to get that monies to operate, but if for some reason they weren't to get it, or they went down for whatever reason, I mean, things are getting high, so. Okay, so we're back with the threshold then.
yeah. Thanks for the question. I think we have a vibrant and effective nonprofit ecosystem in Topeka and Shawnee County, and we have a lot of partners who are doing some really great transformative work with the people that they're serving. That said, numbers of 200% on an outcome suggest that we could probably have some more targeted conversation on those projections in order to be able to establish a more realistic and accurate view. What we don't want to do is we don't want folks to be afraid of not hitting 100%, because that's not really the goal. All of us in our work have metrics that we're trying to achieve, and we don't all hit 100% all the time. And so because the partners are able to select those numbers, we want them to have a more realistic view of what that projection is going to be, so that they have a better sense of at the end of sort of how the effectiveness was. I'm not sure as an individual who's running a program what it tells me that I hit 150%. I don't know what that tells me, except that I served more people,
Right.
and therefore I had more who were successful in the work. So I think working with partners, Juliet and I had a conversation about this. We've done this internally at United Way with grant partners, where we have sat down and had some back and forth conversation about projections, and those have been pretty healthy. Whoever that next vendor is for the Social Service Grants Committee could potentially have that written into that scope of work, so that they could have that conversation back and forth, so that the numbers were a little more accurate.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course.
Thank you. Councilman Kell, any questions at this point?
No, sir.
Thank you. All right. Let's move on to item number 4, review and approval of the cycle items. And again, I'll turn it back over to Brett. We have quite a bit on the calendar. And then if you would, just talk a little bit about priorities and scoring sheet.
Yeah, so in terms of the priorities and the scoring sheet, no conversation there. During the appeal process, there was some conversation related to the board attendance and some of that language. I think that can be cleaned up in an internal way on that piece. So other than that, no, and that can also be made clear in the training that's done by the vendor. So I don't think there's any piece there. But in terms of the calendar, those were the areas that obviously those change every year based on the calendar. And so we have projections for this next year based on the cycle of grants. We're not exactly sure what the November 18th date is on the communication piece. That could very well be today's meeting. We had a little bit of back and forth with city staff on what that is. And so I don't know if there's another meeting that needs to take place. Carrie and I didn't sort of land on anything necessarily there. But the rest of these have been adjusted based on the 2025 year. So we've simply moved those off of weekends and moved those to the dates where they would have been standing before. Just a couple of things to note, that based on the recommendation of another iteration of this committee 2 years ago, the suggestion was that the request for proposal be released prior to the workshop so that the grantees and the potential applicants have an opportunity to read through it and familiarize themselves with it and potentially generate some questions before the workshop, so that RFP is released 2 weeks prior to the application workshop, which we have been holding virtually as our time as vendor, and then that's been recorded and put into EC Impact for those who are unable to attend. And then the rest of these dates here fall into line with roughly the grant timeline that we had during the 2024 calendar year.
All right. Again, any questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Well, I do like that aspect of having the application out prior to the workshop, so then people can work on it and have their questions kind of written down beforehand rather than having to come back later and follow up with more questions. It can kind of work. I think the flow of work can be better by doing that.
Thank you. I guess the only question I have, is there anything in the process, so you've been doing this 3 years? 2 years?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years, yeah.
Anything in the process that, in this last year in particular, that you would like to change, see done differently, added, deleted, whatever?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that at some point, and I'm not suggesting this year, because there will be a transition potentially between vendors, and it's probably going to be a longer process. But there may, based on priorities within the city itself, there may be an opportunity to go back and look at the areas of priority for grants at some point and see how these social services grants fall into line with larger priorities that the city has in a larger strategic plan, for example. I don't think it's a good idea to change those priorities regularly because of the relationships with nonprofits across the community and all of the complexities that are tied up in grant relationships and relationships between the nonprofit sector and the local government. But I do think there may be some opportunity at some point for the city to take a look at larger priorities within the city and see whether or not the priorities that are reflected in the social services grants, which are a significant investment in the community, whether or not those are all in line. That wouldn't necessarily be something that would come from your vendor, but your vendor could certainly provide some direction in terms of larger plans within the city and within the county that other groups are following that may be in line with that. So that would be the only thing. This has been a good process for us over the last 4 years. We have learned a lot. City staff has been exceptional to work with, and we're certainly appreciative of the opportunity to be able to hold the contract the last 4 years.
Great. Thanks for that. Yeah, it occurs to me that as we look at the unsheltered issue and ultimately what we do with the Built for Zero, and that involves a lot of agencies that show up on this list. Maybe that shifts our priority a little bit, but I think I agree with you. It's not something we want to change haphazardly every year. So
Certainly.
certainly something to look at. All right, I think that's item 4. Again, if there's no questions, let's talk a little bit about the vendor contract. So the last 4 years, that was the first time we used a vendor, right? Or
That's my understanding, yes, yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Maybe, and I don't know if you can answer
Yeah,
this,
I can
Rhiannon,
try.
but maybe just overall how, not specifically to United Way, because I think they've done a great job, but just the idea of having an outside vendor to do what this committee used to, frankly, struggle to do. And then tell us what the RFP entails, term and anything that's changed based on what you've learned over the last few years.
Sure, yeah, I will do my best in the absence of Carrie. But what I would say is that I think it's absolutely critical that we have a vendor in place. I think it creates a good buffer. We work with a lot of organizations in the community, partner on several different programs with different funding sources. And I think any time that we can have a third party that can come in and serve as that guiding direction for them and help us best manage the use of those funds and get them executed, I think it helps us. As staff, we have a lot of HUD-funded dollars that we have a ticking time clock on getting them out the door. So anybody that can help us accomplish that mission is much needed and appreciated. Speaking to the RFP specifically, the crib notes that Carrie has provided me is that I know that it went out at the beginning of October and it closes on October 30th. I believe October 24th is when I think the period for questions closes, but we'll be working through procurement to help answer any questions or points of clarification that come out of any submissions, so. Yep.
Is it a 4-year term?
It is
It's a 1 year with the ability to renew for up to 4 years.
Okay, great. All right. Questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I'll just comment that you guys have been great to work with, and you make everything real reasonable and understandable. I'm looking for a word there, but you've done a good job at that, because so many times we have to switch gears over here and then try to switch gears over there. So I do want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
I know I've also heard that from the grantees as well. That
Very good.
and it's been really nice when they come to appeal and then they realize, yeah, I did mess up like that. So that makes it kind of easier. Thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you, Council.
I'd like to echo the sentiments there. I've been on this committee the whole time I've been on my seat, and you guys have been great to work with and answer all the questions we have and try to work with us as best as possible. And the one time there was a mistake, you guys were the first ones to own up and say, hey, our mistake, and we're having ideas on how to fix it right away. So I've really enjoyed working with you all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I think that goes, those comments, both sets of comments go for me as well. This is the only year I've been on the committee, but it was pretty straightforward, I think, thanks to the guidelines and practices that have been established over the last few years. I think that takes us through our action items. I guess we do is review and approval of the cycle items. So I think we do need to go back and approve the calendar as laid out there. I do think that the November 18th meeting is pretty well covered in what we did today, perhaps with the exception of the budget recommendation. And Rhiannon, do you know how that's been established in the past? Is that simply last year's budget increased a little bit, or you may not be able to answer that?
Yeah, don't know the answer.
I think that can come later as well as we get in, because we're really talking about the 26 budget. So do that probably the first part of next year. So I would entertain a motion to approve the 2026 cycle items.
I will approve of for the sake of discussion.
Okay? Councilman?
Second.
All right. Councilwoman?
Well, and I look at this, develops priorities and budget recommendations for the next funding cycle. And it says reviews outcome, develops testimony. Didn't last year we take testimony from some of the grantees? Is that what maybe that is?
So our understanding of what that was the report that you have here was
Okay.
going over the performance measures and providing that, and then providing reflections on the last
Okay.
cycle.
Okay. All right, with that being said, I'll make a motion to approve. Well, I did make a motion.
Yeah, I think we've got a motion by Councilwoman Ortiz, a second by Councilman Kell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. All right, is there anything else that we need to discuss? Rhiannon?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Very good. With nothing else on the agenda, we will close this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.